Hi, good evening, everyone. Last week, we went through all different sessions for Dare to Compete Ignite. It was a tremendous success. As we gathered feedback, one thing that we realized was that students want to know about one particular aspect in terms of brands, marketing, products, what it takes to be a brand, how do we convert products to brand, what is the whole process like, what's a day in the life of a brand manager, marketing manager, sales manager. And we thought that it will be best to have two experts with us on a panel, and we dive into all these aspects, so that the whole student community across B schools, engineering as well as arts and science, get to know or dive into these discrete aspects. Today we have with us Jasrita, who is heading marketing and branding for Fortis Healthcare. She has 14 years of work ex in this domain. Earlier, she was with Max and now with Fortis. The second panelist that we have is Shashank Sharma. He's co-founder of Brainpan, and he has managed brands at Nestle, Dabur, and other FMCGs. Thank you so much, Shashank and Jasrita, for joining us. The first question for me, and to start off with, would be that everybody knows that any company can create a product. How do you create brands out of that product? And where does marketing fit in? I'll go to Jasrita to sort of get a sense in terms of this process in the healthcare segment, and then I'll come to you, Shashank, for the FMCG one.
Although for this, I think it would have been more pertinent to go to somebody who deals with FMCG brands, but nevertheless, we'll take a go at it, right? See, products are something which are, product in a way, like we talk about real estate is brick and mortar. Product has specifications, product has some measure. Brand is much bigger than that. Brand is a piece of real estate that you have in your mind, because brand resides in the minds and the hearts of consumer, right? So in a way, it's the most expensive piece of real estate that is there, right? So the process from products to brands goes over many stages. Of course, it goes through, if it's a new brand, then it goes through a product introduction. What is that introduction? Of course, it has to scale up in terms of sales and revenue. Post that, it has to have some brand love, some love for that particular product or service that is there. And finally, a recall, right? I think recall of all the stages, the blue litmus test stage is the stage of a recall. So once the product is past that recall stage, is when it has become a brand and has truly arrived, right? So that is, that's textbook knowledge, which you'll get from anywhere. But if I apply that to the healthcare industry, then in healthcare, you got to understand that the product is alive. The product is highly skilled, and the product comes with his or her own set of, whatever you want to call them, nuances, because the product here is a doctor. So when you're marketing a product here, you're marketing a living individual, and you're marketing a very unique. Every product is different from the other because it's a living product, because it's a human being, right? So those are the products, right, that we have. If you see, a doctor is a product. How do you market them? Again, how would you market an intellectual? How would you market somebody who comes with a very specific skill set? And here, a skill set which makes the difference between life and death, right? Here's a product to whom you're going to not give money. The exchange here, the transaction here is not just money exchanging hands, it's life and limb, right? So imagine the kind of respect, faith, trust the consumer will have to have. And therefore, and that's not built only by marketeers. I won't be facetious to assume that this job is done entirely by the ilk of brand marketing salespeople. We have a role to play, but I think, like any good principle of marketing, the product has to be good. Because if the product is not good, no amount of marketing, no amount of packaging, no amount of communication or whatever have you would be able to sell it, right? So I think that's how we do that. We talk about the outcomes that are there. We let the consumers, the benefactors of the service, speak for themselves and say, this is my experience, because peer-to-peer moderation here, peer-to-peer communication works the best in this industry, in healthcare, word of mouth, historically and even today, internationally as well as in India. And over a period of time, we see that they become brands. When you think of a Dr. Devi Shetty today, when you think of a Dr. Naresh Trehan today, when you think of a Dr. Ashok Seth today, they are brands in themselves, right? Because they've gone through all of that journey, and there's a whole lot of brand love that their consumers, and in this case, patients and their families have for them. So I guess that's it for me in opening remarks, and I'll toss it over to Shashank to take it forward.
Sure.
Totally agree, Jasrita. Yeah,
Before
please.
Shashank, we come to you. Jasrita, you talked about doctors, right? But I think in hospitals as well, doctors is, let's say, one bigger piece. But the whole experience of, let's say, the treatment that a patient goes through, does that also counts as, let's say, a product in itself, or those are just characteristics of the overall brand?
For some categories, you could say, for some categories. So, for instance, for birthing as a category, experience is a very big piece, right? Because the consumer here is not essentially ill. She's not sick. She's not ill. She doesn't have a condition. She just has a baby to deliver. She's perfectly healthy otherwise, right? And this is one of the very few cases where you're interacting with a healthcare brand when you're when you're not in a state of distress, because majority of the time, you are interacting, your interactions with the brand are in a state of distress when you're not at your your cognitive abilities are not working best. Like in economics, we say that the consumer is rational. I don't think the consumer, a healthcare consumer, at the point that he or she is interacting with healthcare, is rational. I mean, I don't expect them to be rational. You got to got to know that somebody's got a tumor that could be cancerous. The last thing that you'll expect from that individual is to be rational at that point in time, right? I mean, come on, let's have some empathy. So some of these categories, such as birthing, such as preventive health checks, okay, and these are all those categories where the consumer is not essentially ill or sick, right? In those, experience plays a very big role, right? And so you could say that to that extent, a preventive health check is marketed like a product. Okay. Or birthing segment, the whole thing of, you could do it in a water tub, or you could do it, in a suite that you like, or, you get a album and you get the, the paw prints or whatever. There's a full experience around it, and that makes it. But aside from that, the more serious the illness becomes, the more debilitating or the more life-threatening that the illness becomes, is the time when it comes back more and more to the core product, and the experience is important. But I think it plays a bit of a support cast role, and not the hero. The hero remains the product in those cases.
All right. Thanks, Jasrita. Coming to you, Shashank.
So I think something that Jasrita said really hit the nail on the head. And there are two things that she said which I would like to point out, because that will really play out the difference between what a product and a brand is, and what it takes to create the two. One thing is that not just healthcare consumers, I think humans and all consumers are irrational. And because of this irrationality is where the brand steps in. Because the core difference between a product and a brand is simple. Product is just a set of features. Those features can be in healthcare, in FMCG, in automobile, in products like apps like Facebook. They're just a set of features. But brands are none of these tangible things. They are not features. This brand is not a tagline. Brand is not a name. Brand is not an identity. Brand is precisely what people talk about you, what people say about you. That's what the brand is. And as again, what Jasrita said, that it's the real estate in your mind. So the traditional, the most coveted thought in brand is positioning. And positioning means holding a unique real estate in your mind, which is also relevant. So it's unique, it's differentiated, but it's also relevant, because if it's not relevant, just by being unique, you won't have people pay anything for it. So that's what brand is. Now, beyond a differentiation of what a brand and product is, it's about what a brand can do and what a product can do. Uh, a product can give you certain functional benefits, but brand can actually give you a lot more than that. It can give you emotional benefits because inherently we are all, like we said, irrational beings. And that's the gap for which you pay. So brands enable you to charge a premium. We all know that. That premiumness over the product can come for various reasons. It can come because of trust. It can come because of something as frivolous as imagery, and it can come for hundreds of different reasons, but brand is the reason why you pay that premium. And that's why brand can enable you to do a lot more than what a product can do. So which brings me back to how these two things are created. Now, to create a product, you need R&D, you need your supply chain, you need your manufacturing, you need your all the processes, operations that get into creating a product and delivering it to the retail or other channels where you customers can get it. But brands is actually created all the time dynamically, whether by marketing guys, whether by branding guys, whether the experience that happens at the retail, the experience of opening the pack, the experience of using the product. Brand is getting created all the time. And because brand is what people say about you, and any interaction with your product can have a positive or a negative effect on the brand. So that for me, brand creation is not a singular process. It's a sum total of everything that a company does that goes into creating a brand, and that enables you to charge a premium. So one example that stands out for me, and I think it is taken from a very famous speech by Simon Sinek, is that, for example, Apple. When you think of Apple, you think of, again, Apple is the standard example. But I can think of another example, which is Patanjali. Patanjali started with yoga, Ayurveda, but in 2 years they created 1,000 products and just branded it with Patanjali, and people bought into everything. They felt that Baba Ramdev is actually sitting down, making all these products by his own hands, picking jadi booty from the trees and creating it. And that's what the brand could do. He could create a 10,000 crore company in 2 years. But think about Apple, and it says think differently. So Apple could create a laptop, but it could also create an iPod. It can also create an iPhone, because people don't think of Apple as a computer company. But because people think of Dell as a computer company, Dell could try as hard as it can. It can never create a phone. It can never create an MP3 that is successful, because people won't believe it. Ultimately, it's the same chips, same screens that go into producing all these things. But Dell cannot do it because it's a product company known for computer, not for the brand of thinking differently. So I think that's how I think brand and products are very, very different from each other. And I hope that
Sure.
answers.
Sure. Before I come to the marketing aspect, Shashank, there's an interesting question from Anu. She's telling that that's the results. I think she's referring to your example of Patanjali, that
Yeah.
why it. I mean, it was a huge. I mean, it became a huge brand, 10,000 crore business. But is it sustaining, or has it shifted from a personal branding to the company branding altogether? The examples of Dell or Apple.
Yeah. So, of course, I mean, you can always question whether the brand strategy is working for them or not. Whether getting into Patanjali jeans is actually detrimental to the brand, or is it adding to the brand. And that's what I said, that every single thing that you do as a business will impact your brand. It is not just your communication, not just your product. And by the virtue of many different things that Patanjali has been doing in terms of the product, in terms of its communication, that's impacting its brand. Whether it's adversely impacting or it's adding to the brand, that's a question for everyone. I won't comment on that. But it's very clear that when Patanjali noodles came out,
Yeah.
the brand lawyers of Patanjali were shocked. They felt कि यार ये क्या है? मतलब, I don't think this is adding to the brand Patanjali. I don't think I can believe in Patanjali the way I used to behave. When Patanjali launched jeans, now with the entire coronal thing. I mean, so ultimately, that's what brand is. Anything that you do, you need to be 100% careful that your brand is not impacted.
Sure. And just Shashank, in the connected note, what is marketing? We talked about products, we talked about brands. Then what's
Yeah.
marketing?
See, I think marketing, Kotler, first page, the definition is sets of processes involved in promoting and selling your product or something like that. I think marketing is a whole gamut of things. So Like if you say, what is supply chain? Now, supply chain entails many things, right from operations to distribution to sales, because you are taking care of the entire supply chain. I think marketing pretty much is the whole gamut of things that we do as professionals trying to sell a product. Overall, the entire let's say when marketing came into play as a keyword, the idea was to move from a very push kind of sales to a pull kind of sales, where you don't go door to door trying to sell your product. So what we say, there's a cartoon which I quite like, a salesperson knocking on the door and saying, please, 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 please. So 4 P's of marketing. And those are 4 P's of sales. So from 4 P's of sales, when you shift to 4 P's of marketing, the idea is to create pull so that you place your product, your brand in a retail shop and somebody comes and asks for it. So whatever you do to make that happen, it's from identifying opportunity, identifying the right kind of need, trying to create a product that fulfills the need, everything that goes into creating that product, branding that product, selling that product, everything is within the gamut of marketing. So marketing is a much larger function, and these are pieces within that function.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Let me come to you, Jasrita. Now let's sort of define, because I saw one of the I mean, I think there were a couple of comments in terms of what is the job and the area of a marketeer. Okay, so let's, I mean, let me reword it. A day in a life of a marketing manager. If you can just take them through as to what they do on a day-to-day basis, I think they'll have their answers clear.
Right. And before I get to that, I just wanted to add a little bit to what Shashank said, because he very beautifully explained, the whole gamut of marketing. And because we were talking about brands, because we were talking about products and brands, and then we got to marketing. So I'll take a step back to brands and then come to marketing, just 2 bits and then to your question. See, a brand defines who you are. If you, again, that Simon Sinek, I follow him too, and he talks about the why of things, that many companies know what do they do, what do they make, but not many know why they do what they do. Okay, so these very existential questions of who you are as an entity, why do you even exist in this whole continuum, is brand. That's the art of branding. From there comes, how do you create a market for it? How do you position yourself? How do you create awareness for who you are? What are going to be your tactical goals? And that is where marketing follows. So while in theory the scenes like that, this follows. In practice, it happens very beautifully. One is dovetailed into the other. But a simple thing, because a whole lot of people here, I understand from your students, is that when you think about existential questions like who and why, it's branding. And when you come to things like what and how will I do it, is marketing. So I just thought that maybe that would be helpful for people.
Yeah, nicely put.
Right now, a day in the life of a healthcare marketer. Okay, let me make it interesting. See, I think every day we start in the morning and first answer this question: healthcare brand ko marketing ki zarurat kya hai? Why should hospitals even have marketing as a department? Okay, so every day, like those film like 50 First Dates, where you go with the same experience yourself. I think they start the day by telling people why we exist, like you said, and what do we bring to the table. So I think that's part one, right? Secondly, you got to understand that in healthcare, and that's a category thing, in healthcare, healthcare is not a marketing-driven sort of a sector. Okay, they are marketing-driven sectors. The examples that Shashank took, Apple, and these are classic examples. These are marketing-driven organizations. Everything else comes later, right? So the day in the life of a marketeer in a marketing-driven organization is something that Shashank would be able to throw more light on. What I'll be able to tell you is, what is a day in the life of a marketeer, where marketing is a support function? It's an enabler and it's a facilitator function, right? So, that was, I mean, on a lighter note. But of course, you start your day with, something which is like a morning meeting. It's very important for you to, with all the sub functions which are there, to be able to connect and figure, what's happening in digital marketing. Through your online listening tools, you would know what has been the positive or negative sentiment. So real-time listening for a healthcare brand is very, very important. So in the morning, we go through our social listening dashboards, etc. You go through, what number of OPDs or IPDs did the hospitals do on a particular day. During the time of a pandemic, every morning and evening, we were looking at the number of virtual consults that we've been able to give to people. Okay, so we are looking at things like how many home isolation packages are we able to sort of market to people. So whatever the need is, obviously at that point in time, which is why I'm trying to bring in that you need to first thing in the morning, sort of, and that's the whole piece of data that will come in, and the metrics. What is it that you're tracking shifts from industry to industry, but I think first thing in the morning is that you've got to, both the brand and the business metrics which are there. You've got to take a dip into that. What are people saying about your brand? What's the good, bad, ugly, otherwise that? And then how's the business performing? The performance marketing that you have been doing, is it yielding results or not? Does it need to be, where are you on the budget scene, etc.? Because again, as a category, budgets are always, in slow. So I think you start your day with a bit of that. Always being in sync with your product is very important. So you try and do a couple of doctor calls and a few of doctor meetings. That is something that you try to do. You also try and do internal. So I think for healthcare as a sector, and this is where I think that the role of a CMO is changing in many industries, not just healthcare, is that internal stakeholder coordination is just as important as marketing it to the end consumer. Okay, so I think a whole lot of your time is also going into internal stakeholder coordination on whether it is finance, CFO, which is an age-old thing, or with digital becoming important, the collaboration and the liaison that you do with IT and, let's say, patient experience, consumer experience as a department, etc. So those sort of meetings. A debrief at the end of the day. There is always some other crisis to deal with. Such is the fate of service industries, especially healthcare, right? Big, small, or something. And I think that's about it. I mean, I touched on the major aspect. That's the day in the life of a healthcare marketer.
Got it. Thanks. Shashank, a day in a life of a marketeer in FMCG setup.
So I think if you look from a distance, it will look like 50% PowerPoint, 30% meetings and phone calls, and 20% Excel sheets. That's largely what you do. But while you're doing this, there are many other things also that you try and achieve. I think one of the things which I always like talking about, it gives me a lot of pride, is in FMCG, one of my bosses used to say that brand managers are like the mini CEOs of your brand. Because anything that happens with a brand within the country, or if you're handling a bigger, it's your fault. And fault means it's your accountability. So even if there's some error or some glitch that happens in a market down south and you're sitting in Delhi, you need to know that it's happening and you need to know how to fix it. So it is a lot beyond marketing. It is basically, in Dabur, they didn't even used to call us brand managers. They called us product managers, because it starts with the product and it goes to brand. If there's a problem in a factory, if there's a problem in supply chain, if there's a problem in sales, and then of course marketing, branding, communication, media, everything else, that you need to be aware and you need to fix it. So it's like a hub and spoke model where throughout the day you are just coordinating with stakeholders, understanding whatever is happening throughout the business and trying to fix it. And of course, think of the future and think of things to do. But that's a way of talking about, things that you are running around and trying to fix. But largely, what are you responsible for? You're responsible for the brand P&L. So the brand profit and loss statement that comes to you, that this was the revenue, this is the volume that you sold for the year, this is the media that went into this, and this is the outcome or the ROI. These are the things that you need to control and you need to make decisions for. So your day will start with, so in FMCG, whether it's, an Indian company like Dabur or Nestle, MNC, or even Pernod Ricard, which sells, scotches and a very high-end liquor and luxury items. The one thing that you're asked every day in the morning, kitne peti ki sale? And peti is carton of sale. So that's the question you start with every morning, ki kitne peti ki sale hui? And then you start understanding that if you now need to reach towards your monthly target, quarterly targets, and yearly targets, then as of today, based on your plans, what you need to move ahead with, what you need to take back, what you need to modify, and decisions like that, govern the very start of your day every day. I would say I will break
Right.
it down the rest of the job in two pieces. One part is something which is very glamorous and like most brand managers love to do, which is creating advertisement, creating brand strategies, uh, running those communications, making media plans, going into day-long workshops on what the positioning of the brand should be and what the script is like, and going through scripts and fixing issues. That's something everybody loves to do. The other part is the really operational part where, like I said, you have to talk to sales, all the area managers throughout the country, time and again to understand what the strategy is like. Yeah, I was just muted.
So,
Uh, and also trying to talk to factory managers, supply chain guys to ensure that things are running smoothly. So, in a way, there are two very different things that you try to accomplish as a brand manager. One is very long term, thinking about your brand communication, strategy, positioning, but alongside also very, very operational, very, very day to day activities, trying to fix things all across the supply chain. And it's between these two that you are caught up during most of your time in your role as a brand manager.
sure. Shashank, there's a question from Kanak, and she's just asking whether brand complements the product or there is something else. I mean, I don't know whether it's a yes or no or direct answer or so, but go
No,
ahead.
I think for me, I mean, intuitively, I would say that yes, a brand has to complement the product. And I think one example we talked about earlier was uh, like Dell again tried MP3 player. Microsoft tried MP3 players. You must have heard about Zoom. It flopped badly because nobody believed that a brand like Microsoft can give you an MP3 player. And they had everything. I mean, they were a large MNC. They could outsource or source the material, the R&D from wherever they wanted and create a perfect MP3 and start selling it through their existing channels, which were into electronic retails. But all of them flopped because people did not believe that the brand complemented the product. So 100% the brand should complement the product. And whenever you create products which are somehow taking away your brand imagery or not fitting in with your brand, then you are doing justice neither to the brand nor to the product. So clear
Correct.
answer there is
Correct. Sure. Another question again to you, Shashank, before I move on to Jasrita. Because you mentioned about the premiumness, right? So brands are established one so that they can have some premiumness attached. I think that too for the trust that they build all along the sales cycle, right? How do you find the viability of this process? I mean, to what extent can we charge that premium?
So, Yajit, you can charge a premium to any extent under the sun. Okay. It all depends on what your strategy is. And your strategy often starts with your segmentation. Which segment are you trying to take for yourself? Now, let me give you a very, very simple example. And I think this is the best example for me to explain pricing. I was working with Pernod Ricard and they sell Imperial Blue, which is at 300 rupees a bottle. Royal Stag, which is at 700, 600 rupees a bottle. Blenders Pride at 900. 100 Pipers at 1300. They sell Valentine at 1800. Chivas Regal at 2800. These are all Scotch whiskies, if you guys know about it. And then they even charge for Royal Salute 10,000 rupees. And for Hennessy, they charge close to 18,000 rupees. They are all just whiskies made from the same field, giving you the exact same benefit, which is a high. And for that high, they are just charging you very, very different amount because they have targeted different consumers. And this completely depends on you as a business. What target segment are you trying to cater to? If you're trying to cater to a very, very luxury segment, and if you don't price a premium, then your volumes, you won't get your volumes in those segments at all. Other thing which governs on a daily basis is your profit and loss statement. So if you are going for a product like, let's say, shampoos, Now, in shampoos, at the very start of the year, you are told that you have to hit this revenue, and this is the kind of profit you need to generate while doing that. And there are many levers you can pull. You can discount it, you can get your revenues up, but your profit margins will erode. But as long as you can create that much extra volumes, so that despite the discount, you're still able to get those profits, that's a decent strategy that you can follow. But you might say, okay, maybe I have a 20% price premium, but it will erode 10% volume. You'll still generate 10% higher revenue and a higher profit. So it's mathematics. You have to do it on a daily basis. You have to really understand that as of now, if I have to achieve my targets, how much higher can I go? Or do I have to discount it to reach the volumes and the profits that I have been earmarked for the entire annual budget?
Okay, thanks. Jasrita, this question was there in my list as well. So a difference between sales and marketing. It's very black and white. However, on this, there is another question. I mean, you can answer them together. Can a person shift from sales to marketing? Is it a natural process?
Of course,
Go ahead.
of course.
Sure.
So I'll start with this question first. That there needn't be this thick Chinese wall between sales and marketing, and there needn't be this so-called contempt that marketing people. I'm not saying that it's not a blanket statement, but some marketing people have this contempt of So never have contempt of the street. Never have contempt of the from the voice that's coming from the street. So these are roles. One takes off where the other ends in a way, right? So it's a bit like you think of it like a relay race. You think of it like a baton which is handed over, right? And a baton which is handed over, it needs perfect coordination between the runners, right? So therefore, there needs to be this beautiful symphony between sales and marketing. Is it possible to shift from sales into marketing or marketing into sales? Absolutely possible. In fact, in some of these, I was a frontline salesperson. I started out as a direct marketing and a frontline salesperson. I've done hospitality sales and I've done media sales before I decided to move to marketing. And thereafter, I have been in marketing and communications at healthcare. So I think I've been reasonably okay in both profiles. I've enjoyed both of those. What it has done, however, that I can speak from a personal experience is that, when you are looking at marketing, as we say, is an art and a science both, right? The art aspects of marketing, when they overpower is when the ex-salesperson in me tells me, listen, I'm not Picasso. I'm not creating a masterpiece which is going to go in the Louvre. This has a very functional need. It has a very operational need. Get those ticks going, right? Of course, if you're not making a film that is going to Cannes Festival, that is, okay? And the salesperson needs it. It needs to be out there in the market. So tick those boxes, dot your I's, cross your T's, and get that product out, right? And that comes from the sales background, okay? I'm not saying that it is essential, but I think it is helpful, right? So I would actually recommend that salespeople should try and be in the shoes of marketers, and marketers should definitely, most definitely do a sales stint before or after. So that is, answering the second question up front. The first, what is marketing? What is sales? Marketing is, like Shashank has beautifully said, so I'm not going to repeat what he said, that it is the sum total of all the processes. Even I spoke about the what and the how. But what does marketing do? Marketing is creating a need. Marketing is creating a need. Marketing is creating a demand, right? Once that need and once that demand is there, you need some feet on street and you need some distribution channels and you need some people to be able to meet that need. That a marketer is not going into. He's creating that need, he's created that demand, and then that process of joining the dots, that last mile delivery or whatever you want to call it, is done by sales. And that's why I call it a relay race or a baton. That is the difference. And marketing is one to many by definition. Sales by definition is one to few. It's not one to one, but it is still one to few. You would do it, which is why, to a captive audience, you'll do it to a group of, let's say, doctors or a group of traders or whatever, whereas a marketing is going to be one to many, right? So there is also a bit of a scale discussion in that.
Correct. Also, Jasrita, there is another question on in marketing itself, if we can switch industries. I know both of you pretty much have been, so you have been in the healthcare industry since the start, and Shashank, you have been in the FMCG, so to say, right? But do you think switching industries, maybe after 5 years, 10 years into one industry, is easy to do?
Yeah, it's perfectly easy. Because the thing about marketing is that you're not married to anything, right? Uh, at the end of the day, you got to understand what your product is, you got to understand what your brand is, and then the principles of marketing do not change from one brand to the other. Of course, you got to adapt it to the environment, you got to do your whole SWOT and whatever have you, but the principles of how you're going to market that product or service are not going to change drastically from an industry to an industry, right? So if somebody is a services marketing person, for instance, then whether you are in hotels or in airlines or travel and tourism, it's not going to make much of a difference, right? And so on. So while I've been in healthcare for 14 years, but I have done the shift from hospitality to media for a very short while to healthcare, right? So I didn't find any difficulty. Of course, you got to get your hands dirty in trying to understand your product. You should have to be thorough with your knowledge. That is something that you should be willing to do when you switch industries, right? That hard work has to be done, but beyond that, you're just marketing.
Okay.
So I
All
think
right.
I'd just like to add that what Jaswita is saying spot on. The basics of marketing and what you do does not change from industry to industry. The only issue, if you're asking how easy it is from a recruiter perspective, and how easy to for you to shift from a recruiter perspective, then see, it's people, humans are irrational, and from irrationality comes from, let's say, somebody who's recruiting in let's say FMCD, consumer electronics. So somebody says, Ki, why don't you hire marketing or a brand manager from somebody who is from the same segment? Because then this person feels comfortable that this person knows his business in and out, and he won't have to be taught the entire thing from ground up. If that is the kind of directive that comes from top management, then ultimately the HR guys who are recruiting will have that in the CV or the requirement itself, and that might limit it. And that happens, it definitely happens. But is it very limiting? No. You have always cases of people shifting industries all the time. It's just about the probability bit. Maybe shifting
Yeah.
within the industry is higher. Probability of shifting outside an industry might be a little lower because of these perception issues. That's the only thing.
Okay. Shashank, also tell me something. How is data and analytics important for a marketing manager? I mean, in this day and age where technology is changing maybe every year or every 6 months or so, how
Yeah.
are the data and the analytics playing a very, very important role, and how is technology enabling it? Not through Excels, but through the technologies.
Okay, so I think a quick question answer is that data analytics is absolutely critical. I mean, it's only about the extent of data analytics that's needed. Sometimes we always say that too much analysis leads to paralysis, but definitely data analytics is very much a part of. So when I mentioned the split of a day as a brand manager, 20 to 30% times is spent on Excel, and the reason being that. So just to give you a sense of how decisions are made, let's say you made a media plan. Now you are thrown with tons of data from the delivery team on performance of this media, which is based on cost per channel, was the reach, how many people got connected, how effective your media was. Now, unless you go through all this, how will you make sure, or how will you review your process and make it better? Sales, day in and day out, every city, every these days, what has happened, and sensor technology, how I've seen change in the last 12 years. Previously, there was no secondary data at all. Secondary data is the sales from your factory to your retailer. So people didn't know how many retailers got sold, what was the quantity, what was the unit, how much of it got liquidated. Now you get that on a dynamic basis. There is a system in place by all FMCGs. Every SKU that is being sold is accounted for. And when you have so much data, then anyone who is munching this data better is making better decisions, is creating more optimized media, is making his, let's say, promotion plans better because he knows an X promotion performed better in metros compared to non-metros, in A-class outlets, bigger outlets compared to smaller outlets. So tomorrow he won't waste his money in places where it's not working. And this optimization will only happen if you're continuously looking at data and analyzing it with every possible perspective. Consumer data, I mean, researches that you do, the data that is thrown at you with household panels, which tell you an ex-consumers uses XYZ kind of product, that's the usage. So there is no end of data. I mean, if you start getting into it, there will be paralysis. So you'll have to stop some point, take a decision and move on. But you can keep doing it all day long.
Correct, correct. Jasrita, let's get into how marketing is evolving during these times of COVID and pandemic, how empathy is playing a role, how because see the environment around you becomes very, very negative. To have a neutral tone, to have a positive tone, also it takes a lot for a brand to push out. There have been many examples, right? So,
Yeah.
according to you, how is marketing or the characteristics of marketing changing in in these times, especially for the healthcare segment?
Yeah, so I think first I would say is that get the context right. Okay, the some of the brands that your campaigns that you've been alluding to is because you cannot appear to be tone deaf in your conversation, right? So when a pandemic of this scale is happening, and when it's a question of survival, right? At that time, you perhaps cannot be talking about luxury cruise experiences, so to say. I'm just saying an example, right? So just get the context right. Don't be tone deaf in your communication. For once, think it is larger than you, your brand, your sector. It is larger than you, and therefore collaboration is very important. So first is context. Don't be tone deaf. The second for me is the power of collaboration. And here one has to break down those silos, whatever those silos were, whether it was internal or it is between rivals, or it is between, whatever it is, you all have to come together because this is something that we haven't seen, our generation hasn't seen. We read about the Spanish flu, but our generation, living generation, has not seen something like this, right? So only if we come together would we be able to do it. So I think the power of collaboration here is very, very important. The second thing. The third I'd like to say is that, real-time listening and action is very important, right? We think of agility as an IT thing, that it's not an IT thing, right? Agility is very, very important in the time of a crisis, any crisis it is. And with agility, it doesn't mean that legs are moving faster, mouth is speaking faster. It's not that, right? Agility here means that you're able to listen to it real time and act on it real time. And if you're doing something, then you're able to course correct it real time, that you can respond to what's happening in the environment. Okay, let's talk about this pandemic and how things were changing. The advisories were changing. Health in this country is a state subject. So one state health advisory was different from another state's health advisory. Now, if you happen to run hospitals in Delhi and NCR, then there are 3 state governments advisories that you have to adhere to: UP, Delhi, and Gurgaon, right? Somebody's got to make sense of it, and somebody's got to break it down and make sense for the consumer, because the consumer, the patient here, is already in a state of distress, right? That is when we were putting up these, the government advisories which were coming, and we were breaking it down into more information which is usable format and putting it out to people on an everyday basis. Whether it is about usage of HCQS, or it is about using masks the right way, or it is what kind of masks to be worn, etc. So at the time of a pandemic, you have to think about, you have to forget about brain tumor surgery and spinal surgeries. No, those can wait. Right now, you have to think about public health concerns, and which is where I'm saying that you have to rise above your brand, you have to rise above your category, and you have to talk about, here's a problem. If we live through this problem, there will be a consumer, there will be a market, there will be a price, and then there will be something. Right now, focus on this. I think that's very important. Scenario planning for the next disruption. We've heard the WHO chief that the coronavirus might never go away. It will become a part of the virus pool, pretty much like HIV has. When HIV entered, it never left, right? So if coronavirus is going to become a part of the pool, then that means that, and it is not a scary thing, but it's just epidemiology, that once in our lifetime, all of us here are going to be affected with it, are going to be infected with it, right? So how do you plan for the next disruption? Because 3 months back, we were planning for post-COVID, but there is no post-COVID. There is going to be during COVID, and there are going to be some, intermissions between this COVID 1 to COVID 2 to COVID 3 to some other COVID. So how do you plan? That scenario planning and that business continuity planning, which earlier was only there in fancy, it was discussed in boardrooms. There were those fancy decks, presentation decks, never put to use because there was never the need to put to use. Today, when you put this to use, you know what the deficiencies are, whether on labor shortages or on the point of technology, etc. So how do you, plan for the next disruption? I think that's very important. Another thing for healthcare and for everyone is going to be frugal innovation, right? So right now we're dealing with this pandemic. There are 2 more pandemics which are coming, definitely, which are in the making. The next is going to be a mental health pandemic, okay? And the history of disease tells us that physiological disease or a health pandemic follows, is succeeded by a mental health pandemic that happens, because you're going to have a generation of people who have faced loss. Think about the kind of loss that we've had in places like Italy and Spain, where the demographic is more elderly, where there were more elderly people. And we know that the disease manifests itself worse in the elderly. So, there is going to be a generation of people who will not have closure, who saw a loved one go to a hospital and that's the end of it that they saw of him or her. They couldn't even say the final goodbye. So how do you deal with those people? How do you expect them to go back to work and be normal for the rest of their life? The other pandemic that's in the making is, all this disposable waste which is coming with all the disinfectants, the personal protective equipment, and all of the use of single-use plastics, and all of this thing has gone up in the last few days, right? So how do there'll have to be frugal innovation in areas like reusable masks or reusable personal protective gear, etc., etc. So I think that is something that we'll have to help. And finally, it'll sound like a cliche, but start thinking digital, those industries who haven't, and within digital, start thinking mobile first. Those are some of the lessons for me personally in this pandemic.
I think the last part, everybody agrees, and every company on this earth now, because they're working from home, everything is going digitally. I think everybody
Yes.
has already done that. Yeah.
What 3 years of digital transformation could not do,
Yeah.
4 days did. Just an additional point that, virtual consults were not allowed by the government of India till the lockdown. The day of the lockdown, 22nd, between 22nd and 25th, all state governments said for the period of the pandemic, virtual health is all right to go with. 27th is when we launched our virtual consults platform, and I think everyone did in the industry. So for decades and decades, there are practitioners who have felt that how can you treat a patient if you do not put your stethoscope to the chest or you do not check the pulse, right? And rightly so for a number of diseases. But this pandemic overall, made it possible. And today, everyone is getting along well with virtual healthcare.
Yeah.
People are getting some succor from all of it. So, yeah, that's the proof of the pudding.
Got it. Shashank, I want to throw this question to you. So, how corporates are utilizing CSR as the tool of marketing? So, what they are now doing is that they are mixing in terms of CSR with marketing and everything coming together. And also, there is also a silver lining between ethics, morale, and the other things. So, according to you, is it fine for corporates to get CSRs and then get into the marketing, or is it a normal process itself?
See, I think it all boils down to the company's purpose and vision. So, for example, ultimately CSR is beyond just a matter of reducing emissions.
Shashank, we are losing you.
I think my internet just got broken. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, better. Please go on.
Okay. Yeah, so I was saying it's beyond the mathematics, because CSR is ultimately something that government requires you to do. A certain percentage of your profit needs to go into CSR. That is how it was mandated. But slowly and steadily, many companies have started using this as an opportunity. So it's always, or it takes time for any company to be agile enough, especially big companies, for something like this to, become a part of their DNA, and them to realize that let me now use this as an opportunity to build our own brand. Now, here it depends on how smartly the businesses are able to turn their CSR into a larger imagery for the company. And I've seen companies do it. I've also seen companies who have not been able to do it so far. So, for example, Nestle chooses to use this CSR in order to create a complete ecosystem for milk farmers. And Nestle is into dairy. Nestle is creating brands in dairy. In fact, when I was in Nestle, then I was leading the dairy business, and it was a huge benefit for us that there was a large community which saw Nestle as their daily wage. They earned their daily wages through Nestle, and as a story which we could spin that in press releases, in different marketing communications, in different videos. We could play it out on digital. It could give us a lot of fodder for content marketing. So if your overall brand purpose and brand vision fits in with CSR, and actually CSR as laid out by government gives you an opportunity to play into whatever field and domain that you choose to do. For example, Coca-Cola can choose to do it with water because Coca-Cola has this imagery that they're consuming a lot of water. So if they are able to turn this opportunity and use this money to conserve water, then suddenly Coca-Cola is now known for conserving water instead of wasting water. And so companies have to be a little bit more creative in how they use their CSR money. I think there's good to be had in whichever domain you put money in. If you do it smartly, it will be a win-win situation. And companies won't crib that 2% of their profits is going to CSR. Instead, they will be happy to put that money there because they are gaining from it.
Yeah,
Sure.
I agree.
Okay. All right.
Just to add to Shashank's point, we are a young nation, right? Today, 1 in 3, people is a millennial, if you look at it. And millennials care about a different set of things than Generation X and Y. We all know that, right? So, what carbon footprint you're leaving behind on the planet, right? Who's power, power centers where they are being controlled, etc. Or is it a blockchain effect? What are you doing for empowerment, for literacy, for education? These kind of things are very important to millennials. The whole story behind the brand, where you come from, right? Very different from how the conversation used to be in the 80s or the 90s, right? As countries have a younger demographic and as the purchasing power rests with millennials, I think this marrying of CSR with the brand purpose will become more and more important, because very soon we will see in a decade's time that they will start demanding and asking those questions. Not as to what do you make and whatever, but how do you make it? Is it made in sweatshops? Right? And the how of it and the story behind the product and the service is going to assume more importance. So it's time that Indian establishments wake up to CSR as not just compliance, but something which can be your brand purpose as well.
Got it. Got it. Thanks. Also, Jasrita, I mean, I would like to spend the last 6, 7 minutes that we have on. So until now, brands, branding, marketing, and pretty much sales as well. I mean, the FMCG segment has been predominantly been for the MBA grads. Now, for our users who are arts and science grads, humanity grads, or for that matter, engineering, do they have a chance of even getting into these profiles? Even if they don't get into a B school, have you seen those examples in your
Yes.
industries?
Yes. So I'll come to this answer, but I'm going to take a bit of a circuitous route, if you would indulge me for a couple of
Sure.
minutes. Okay. I want to dwell first on how the life of a marketer has changed, how these MBA grads who came, let's about a decade ago, okay, or a decade and a half ago, the tools that they came with to sell and market the product, okay, management graduates, how life has changed for them today, okay. So depending on if you are in the services sector, then you're supposed to play the role of a CMO as well as a CEO, not the chief executive officer, but the chief experience officer. Okay, so you need to have, you need to know your whole consumer journey, your patient touch points, etc., etc. If you're in an IT or a technology driven company, then you're supposed to be a CMO as well as the CIO, okay, or have a good enough understanding of that. If you're in FMCG or other high growth industries, etc., then a lot of places the CMO's position is being done away with. There is a chief growth officer, so to say, okay, which is sales, marketing, business development, everything rolled into one, right? So depending on which sector you're in, the role of a CMO itself is changing, which means that even those MBA graduates who had come in so called armed with all the information, with a marketing major and what have you, okay, today they need to adapt and find new skill sets, right? Right? This is how the role of a CMO is changing, right? So, with this example, what I want to say is that there is something that an education prepares you for. Okay, there is no substitute to it. But then there is a whole lot of unlearning and a relearning that you have to do over a period of time, right? And certain combinations work very, very well. So, if you want to be again in the IT technology sector, then if you have a technology degree or a BE, in addition to MBA, it works beautifully, right? In healthcare, we see a whole lot of people who have, done medical, MBBS, etc. earlier, and then have done an MBA, etc. Right? So, education, MBA is important, but it's not mandatory, is what I would say. People who are coming from other streams can also pick up this skill. What they have to be willing to is, of course, like I said earlier, get your hands dirty. I think that the learning curve in the beginning is that much more steeper for you, and so you got to put in extra effort to be able to do that. There is no marketing gene, so to say, that you're born with it and you've learned it and then only you can do it. नहीं, इसके अंदर I think काफी democratization in this world, the way I look at it. I like to hear from Shashank.
Yeah, Shashank, over to you.
No, of course, I totally agree, Jasrita. I think when you talk about marketing, and like in my family, there are many doctors and lawyers and others. And when you talk about marketing, you just think, how do I prove to them that I'm doing something which is specialized? Because
Correct.
it's everything that we do needs common sense. I mean, you can, if you have enough common sense, you can create the best of brands, you can create the best of marketing plans, and all it takes is common sense. What you learn in MBA, and if anybody learns a lot in MBA, I don't think it's subject expertise. It's more about working in teams. I don't think any subject you learn anything in depth that you can just come and start, giving gyan back or adding value in that particular domain. What you really learn is working in structure. So while marketing primarily operates on common sense, what you learn over time is a lot more structure to it, a lot more tenacity to work with teams and to understand people, hear people, drive your thoughts, drive projects, drive people, motivate people. All these things are learned, a part of it during your MBA days, but largely you learn this on your job. So I don't think MBA as a degree equips you with something which is as such required. I mean, you just need, now with YouTube and with courses available online, probably the basic terms, the jargons are something you can familiarize yourself with within a month and start on your work. But the other angle is from a recruiter perspective again, because that's always the other angle. Can you do it? Yes. But
Can't hear you,
I
Shashank.
think my internet.
Shashank, we lost
Yeah.
you.
So can you do it? Yes. But yeah. Am I back?
Yeah.
Yeah, now you're back. Go on.
Yeah. So just the last point is, of course, you can do it, but then from a recruiter's perspective, they have certain criteria, and those criteria sometimes create certain barriers. Whether these barriers are valid or not is something questionable, but of course there are barriers, and I think over time these barriers are breaking because people are looking a lot more at diversity, people coming from different domains and adding value through that. So I think over time this barrier is also melting away, but certainly there are certain barriers. People will just write MBA from top tier college, tier 2 college for a certain role, and the recruiters will start looking for those profiles and people will get
Right.
filtered out. So that's the reality which, of course, you need to be aware of. but you're definitely
And
equipped to become a marketer.
yeah, I think my thoughts on this is that even if you are, let's say, a grad from a good institute, or for that matter, tier two institute as well, the first entry, the opportunity are these startups that are giving you, because they don't have any entry barriers. They don't even
Yes.
have an HR per se,
That's
right?
true.
They want people to work. And I know because earlier, 2 years back, we were in that co-working space wherein we had about 10 other uh, startups, and all of them are recruiting left and right anybody who can just have that common sense and work with them day in and day out and get that work done. He or she needs to be a hustler. They can actually learn on the job and carry on. I think that's the way to build your profiles, and then you might be able to match your
I totally agree.
let's say expertise, or go beyond the other segments. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
completely.
on closing
Totally
thoughts,
agree.
Shashank, Jasrita, maybe a minute or two. What would be your advice to the next gen who are just passing out of college, who want to be marketing managers?
You want to go first, Shashank?
Yeah, sure. So I think, just be a lot more aware, because I think being aware of your surrounding is the most critical part in marketing. You have to be aware, and you have to know how things are moving, what are the trends you need to catch on to. You need to have the pulse of things, because see, as we are shifting more from traditional media to digital marketing media, it is becoming a lot more about people finding you instead of you blasting your communications to the mass. And that means that you need to be relevant, and you need to be interesting all the time. And being relevant and being interesting comes a lot with understanding the pulse of where your audience is, how they are moving. I think today, I mean, if I have to recruit somebody in marketing today, I will look for two things more than anything else: motivation and hunger to learn, and somebody who is aware and who is catching on to the pulse of how things are moving. So that, because things will move, today it's Facebook, tomorrow it will be something else, today it's Insta, tomorrow it will be something else. Somebody who is willing to make that jump, keep learning, and keep making that change is somebody I will today look for. So I think, as a person, if you are interested in moving in that direction, then of course marketing is for you. Everything else is just structure, formats, jargons that you will pick on the way, any which way.
Right. I completely agree
Right.
with what Shashank said, and that's my segue into saying that always remember that every function has a role in the organization, right? When we start working, oftentimes, I think people forget that. And that is the human condition. That's nobody's fault. We think we work for a boss, we think we work for an organization. Please always remember, if you're taking up marketing as a career, you're working for the consumer. You're the consumer's voice in the room. So even if you, when you reach the boardroom, please remember the seat that you're sitting on, that chair belongs to the consumer. So always echo the consumer's voice in whichever room that you're in. That's one thing that I'll remind you. Keep reminding yourself, because you will forget it. Like, I think Shashank is also nodding, like we've forgotten, somewhere along the journey, and then we had to remind ourselves, right? So that's number one. Second is what Shashank said: be the eyes and the ears of the organization, okay? Because you are the eyes and ears of the organization. Every other, function, whether it is an HR that is very, very people focused, internal finance, again, very, very internal focused, right? But marketing is one of those unique few functions which are the eyes and ears of the organization. That's the pulse that he was talking about. So always remember that. That's point number two. And third is, please, this is not something that would be over can be overemphasized more, but internal stakeholder collaboration is going to be just as important as selling to the external consumer, right? So these are my three mantras for people who are starting to build their career in marketing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shashank. Thank you so much, Jasrita. The discussions have been very, very insightful. I see comments wherein people would want to reach out to both of you. I think, guys, you can find them on LinkedIn, send them a connect request, and I'm sure they'll accept it, and you can take it forward from there. Thank you so
Sure.
much, Shashank, Jasrita. It's been a pleasure hosting you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Ankit.
Thank
Thanks all
you.
of you, and all the best.
Yes, we enjoyed
Okay.
ourselves thoroughly. Thank you.